The great sentinel was right there at the top of the ridge, where Will had known it would be, its lowest branches a bare foot off the ground. Will slid in underneath, flat on his belly in the snow and the mud, and looked down on the empty clearing below. His heart stopped in his chest. For a moment he dared not breathe. Moonlight shone down on the clearing, the ashes of the fire pit, the snow-covered lean-to, the great rock, the little half-frozen stream. Everything was just as it had been a few hours ago. They were gone. All the bodies were gone. "Gods!" he heard behind him. A sword slashed at a branch as Sir Waymar Royce gained the ridge. He stood there beside the sentinel, long sword in hand, his cloak billowing behind him as the wind came up, outlined nobly against the stars for all to see. "Get down!" Will whispered urgently. "Something's wrong." Royce did not move. He looked down at the empty clearing and laughed. "Your dead men seem to have moved camp, Will." Will's voice abandoned him. He groped for words that did not come. It was not possible. His eyes swept back and forth over the abandoned campsite, stopped on the axe. A huge double-bladed battle-axe, still lying where he had seen it last, untouched, a valuable weapon. "On your feet, Will," Sir Waymar commanded. "There's no one here. I won't have you hiding under a bush." Reluctantly, Will obeyed. Sir Waymar looked him over with open disapproval. "I'm not going back to Castle Black a failure on my first ranging. We will find these men." He glanced around. "Up the tree, be quick about it. Look for a fire." Will turned away, wordless. There was no use to argue. The wind was moving. It cut right through him. He went to the tree, a vaulting grey-green sentinel, and began to climb. Soon his hands were sticky with sap, and he was lost among the needles. Fear filled his gut like a meal he could not digest. He whispered a prayer to the nameless gods of the wood, and slipped his dirk free of his sheath. He put it between his teeth to keep both hands free for climbing. The taste of cold iron in his mouth gave him comfort. Down below, the lordling called out suddenly, "Who goes there?" Will heard uncertainty in the challenge. He stopped climbing. He listened. He watched. The woods gave answer. The rustle of leaves, the icy rush of the stream, a distant hoot of a snow owl. The others made no sound. Will saw movement from the corner of his eye, pale shapes gliding through the wood. He turned his head, glimpsed a white shadow in the darkness, then it was gone. Branches stirred gently in the wind, scratching at one another with wooden fingers. Will opened his mouth to call down a warning, and the words seemed to freeze in his throat. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps he had only been a bird, a reflection of the snow, some trick of the moonlight. What had he seen after all? "Will, where are you?" Sir Waymar called. "Up." "Can you see anything?" He was turning in a slow circle, suddenly wary, his sword in hand. He must have felt them, as Will felt them. There was nothing to see. "Answer me! Why is it so cold?" It was cold. Shivering, Will clung more tightly to his perch, his face pressed hard against the trunk of the sentinel. He could feel the sweet, sicky stab on his cheek. A shadow emerged from the dark of the wood. It stood in front of Royce. Tall it was, and gaunt and hard as old bones, with flesh pale as milk. Its armour seemed to change colour as it moved. Here it was white as a new-fallen snow, there black as shadows, everywhere dappled with the deep green of trees. The patterns ran like moonlight on water with every step it took. Will heard the breath go out of Sir Waymar Royce in a long hiss. "Come no further," the lordling warned. His voice cracked like a boy's. He threw the long sapple cloak back over his shoulders to free his arms for battle, and it took his sword in both hands. The wind had stopped. It was very cold. The other slid forward on silent feet. In its hands was a long sword, like none that Will had ever seen. No human metal had gone into the forging of that blade. It was alive with moonlight, translucent, a shard of crystal so thin that it seemed almost to vanish when seen edge on. There was a faint blue shimmer to the thing, a ghost light that played around its edges, and somehow Will knew it was sharper than any razor. Sir Waymar met him bravely. "Dance with me, then." He lifted his sword high over his head, defiant. His hand trembled from the weight of it, or perhaps from the cold. Yet in that moment Will thought he was a boy no longer, but a man of the night's watch. The other halted. Will saw its eyes, blue, deeper and bluer than any human eyes, a blue that burnt like ice. They fixed on the long sword trembling on high, watched the moonlight running cold along the metal. For a heartbeat he dared to hope. They emerged silently from the shadows, twins to the first, 3 of them, 4, 5. Sir Wayman may have felt the cold that came with them, but he never saw them, never heard them. Will had to call out. It was his duty, and his death if he did. He shivered and hugged the tree and kept the silence. The pale sword came shivering through the air. Sir Wayman met it with steel. When the blades met there was no ring of metal on metal, only a high thin sound at the edge of hearing, like an animal screaming in pain. Royce cheeked a second blow, and a third, then fell back a step. Another flurry of blows, and he fell back again. Behind him, to right, to left, all around him, the watchers stood patient, faceless, silent, the shifting patterns of their delicate armour making them all but invisible in the wood, yet they made no move to interfere. Again and again the swords met, until Will wanted to cover his ears against the strained, anguished keening of their clash. Sir Wayman was panting from the effort now, his breath steaming in the moonlight. His blade was white with frost, the others danced with pale blue light. Then Royce's parry came a beat too late. The pale sword bit through the ring-mail beneath his arm. The young lord cried out in pain. Blood welled between the rings. It steamed in the cold, and the droplets seemed red as fire where they touched the snow. Sir Wayman's fingers brushed his side. His moleskin glove came away soaked with red. The other said something in a language that Will did not know. His voice was like the cracking of ice on a winter lake, and the words were mocking.